Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going on a journey through the world of headlines. You know, those things. We're diving into this blog post from a site called Alreflections. It's called How to Make Headlines That Resonate with Your Brand.
Okay.
And it's by Mihigo ER Anaja. Don't worry, this isn't just for, marketing people or whatever. We're going to unpack these techniques so you can see through the hype of any headline you see.
Oh, so like news headlines and social media and...
Yeah, like everything.
Interesting. Well, what I think is so interesting about this is it really touches on the psychology of how we consume information. Like a well-crafted headline can be incredibly persuasive.
Yeah. You know, like that time you clicked on that article?
Yeah.
About like the habits of highly effective people.
Oh, yeah.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
But now we're giving you the tools to decode these headlines and see what's really going on.
I like that. So, for example, this author talks about brand voice, basically, about keeping a consistent, personality in your headline.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So, how a headline for a tech company will sound totally different than, like, a lifestyle brand.
Oh, exactly.
How does this brand voice thing apply to, the average person? Think of a brand that you love. What about their messaging really speaks to you? Do their headlines draw you in? Or do they feel off?
Yeah, it's crazy how a headline can make or break it. This author, he goes beyond just the words. He's saying that headlines should reflect the brand's core message and values.
Right, because we can all tell when something's inauthentic.
Yeah, totally.
It's like when a company tries to jump on a trend that doesn't really fit their style.
Yeah.
It just feels so forced.
Exactly. The author gives this great example of a sustainability-focused brand. Their headline should showcase, a real commitment to the environment, not just use buzzwords.
Right. And speaking of buzzwords, another key point that the author brings up is knowing your audience. Headlines need to speak directly to those people. You're trying to reach them.
Absolutely. He mentions how headlines that focus on efficiency would really appeal to people who value saving time.
Oh, interesting. That makes me think about all those headlines out there that use emotional triggers, like fear or urgency. Do those work on you? Or do you find them manipulative?
That's a good question. I think as consumers, we're getting more aware of those tactics. If we look at it, authenticity and transparency are becoming much more important.
Oh, for sure. Brands can't just rely on flashy headlines anymore. They have to build those genuine connections.
Yes.
And talking about connections, the author talks about using phrases like expert tips or insider secrets to make it feel exclusive, like you're part of a special club.
Right. That taps into our natural desire to learn things and feel like we're in the know.
Yeah, for sure. But how much of this exclusivity is actually real and how much is just, clever marketing?
I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah. And the author himself seems to be aware of this. He lists all his accomplishments right in the post. It's like he's saying, hey, I'm the expert here. Trust me.
Yeah. It's an interesting approach. He's not just telling us how to write good headlines. He's showing us. He's got the experience.
Yeah. But do you think that's always necessary? Can we just trust the information, even if the author doesn't, brag about all their credentials?
That's a really good point. It makes you wonder about the balance between proving yourself and just letting the content speak for itself.
Right. And maybe that's something we need to be more aware of. As readers, not just blindly accepting someone's expertise, but actually looking at what they're saying.
I agree. It all comes back to being a more critical reader. But before we go too far, let's go back to some of the techniques the author talks about, like using emotional triggers in headlines, things like humor, empathy, even inspiration.
Cool.
What are some headlines that have really grabbed your attention?
Oh, that's a good one. Let me think.
What emotion? Were they playing on... Hold on. Before we get too lost in examples, I think we need to talk about the balance between being creative and being clear. You could have the most clever headline, but if it's not clear what it's about, it's not going to work.
Right. It's like those clickbait headlines that promise you something amazing, and then it's a totally boring article.
Yeah.
You just feel tricked.
Exactly.
So how do we find that sweet spot? How do we make headlines that are both engaging and informative? And what does all this mean for us as readers?
That's a big question. Yeah. We're going to get into that.
For sure. But first, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. To continue our deep dive into the world of headlines, don't go anywhere.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Before the break, we were really getting into the psychology of headlines. We're starting to see how these simple phrases can have a huge impact on how we see information
Right.
and how we engage with it.
Yeah, and this author, Mihigo, he brings up a really interesting point about headlines. It's not stated directly, but I think it's implied.
Ugh.
I love reading between the lines. What do you see?
Well, to me, it seems like writing good headlines is all about building relationships.
Okay, that's interesting. Tell me more.
Think about it. When you find a headline that really resonates with you, it's often because it speaks to your interests,
Yeah.
your needs, your values. It's almost like the brand is saying, hey, we get you. We're on the same page.
Yeah, it's like when you meet someone new and you instantly click. You're just vibing on the same frequency.
Exactly. And that's what a good headline can do. It starts that connection, that sense of trust and understanding, so you're more likely to read the content
Yeah.
and engage with the brand.
Okay, so a bad headline can actually hurt that potential relationship.
Would act.
It's like saying, nope, we're not on the same page, moving on.
Right. And that's why it's so important for brands to really understand their target audience and make headlines that speak to them. It's not about manipulating people. It's about real communication
Yeah.
and building a connection based on shared interests and values.
Okay, so we know that headlines can be powerful tools for building relationships. But what about those times when a headline feels like it's trying to trick us or manipulate us? We've all fallen for those clickbait headlines that promise the world but don't deliver. How do we avoid that?
Right. That's where critical thinking comes in. We need to be aware of those tactics and approach headlines with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Yeah, don't just click on everything that sounds juicy. Take a moment. Consider the source,
Yeah.
the language, and whether the headline feels true to the brand.
Exactly. And remember, a headline is just one piece of the puzzle. It's meant to get you interested and make you want to learn more. It shouldn't be the only reason you decide to read something.
Right, it's like a first impression. It can be intriguing
Yeah.
and make you want to know more. But you shouldn't judge a book by its cover.
I like that. That's a great analogy. And just like first impressions, sometimes a headline can be misleading. It's important to go deeper and really look at the content before you make up your mind.
Okay, so we talked about brand voice, knowing your audience, and building relationships through headlines. But let's get practical. What are some tips or tricks people can use to write headlines that work?
Mihigo suggests using strong verbs and action words. So instead of saying something like 5 tips for better sleep, try something more active like unlock the secrets to a restful night. Or transform your sleep habits with these 5 powerful tips.
Ooh, I like those. They're definitely more engaging. It makes me want to click and find out those secrets.
Yeah. Another good technique is using numbers or lists. Headlines like 10 ways to boost your productivity or the 3 biggest mistakes people make on their resumes are really appealing because they give you a clear structure for a specific topic.
Right, it's like, okay, I know what I'm getting into here. Give me those 10 ways.
Exactly. And another strong strategy is to use questions. Headlines like, are you making these? Common grammar mistakes. Or, is your morning routine sabotaging your success? Make us curious, and we want to know the answers.
Yeah, it feels like the headline is talking directly to me, challenging me to think about my own habits
Right.
and maybe learn something new.
Exactly. That's what makes a good headline so effective.
Right.
It's not just a statement. It's an invitation to start a conversation and explore new ideas.
Okay, so we've got strong verbs, numbers, lists, questions.
Wow.
What else?
The author also talks about using emotional triggers, headlines that make you feel curious, excited, or even a little bit afraid. Can be really good at grabbing your attention.
We have to be careful with those, right? We don't want to seem like we're manipulating people. We're being too sensational.
Oh, for sure. It's all about balance. Use those emotional triggers, but don't overdo it and make sure they fit with your brand voice and your values. You want to intrigue people, not scare them away.
Right. Okay, so let's recap. To write headlines that resonate, we need to define our brand voice, understand our audience, use strong verbs, incorporate numbers or lists, ask engaging questions, and add a little bit of emotional spice.
Exactly. And most importantly, we need to see headlines as a way to build relationships with our readers, not just a way to get them to click.
Right. It's all about creating that connection, that shared understanding, that mutual interest. But how do we know if our headlines are working? Is there a way to measure their effectiveness?
That's a good question. It brings us to something that the author only mentions briefly, A/B testing. It's a simple technique, but it's really powerful for comparing different headlines and seeing which one does better.
Oh, so it's like a science
It's
experiment.
for headlines.
Yeah, exactly. You create two versions of a headline. Maybe one uses a question, the other uses a list, and then you track which one gets more clicks or engagement. This data helps you understand what your audience likes and how to improve your headline writing.
That's cool. You don't have to guess. You have real data to help you decide.
And the best part is you're always learning and getting better. It's a continuous process of experimenting and refining. This is making me rethink how I look at headlines, both as a writer and as a reader. It's not just about catchy phrases. It's about crafting a message that resonates, builds relationships, and sparks real interest.
And that's why this topic is so fascinating. It goes deep into the psychology of language, persuasion, and how we connect with information.
Well said. Now, before we wrap up, I think it would be helpful to look at some real-world examples of headlines, some that work really well and some that maybe don't.
Yeah, I have a few in mind. Let's see if we can break them down and learn from them.
I love a good headline teardown. Let's do it. Okay, so let's put on our headline analyzing hats. What examples did you bring?
All right, well, let's start with this one. Revolutionize your workflow with our cutting-edge software.
Okay. Sounds pretty catchy. And those are some strong words. What do you think?
Yeah, it's not bad, but it's a little bit generic. It uses strong verbs like revolutionize and cutting edge, which is good, but it doesn't really tell us anything specific.
Okay, so how could we make it better?
Well, we could add a number or a time frame to make it more concrete and focus on results like revolutionize your workflow in 30 days with our cutting-edge software.
Okay.
5 ways our software will revolutionize your workflow.
Oh, those are much better. They feel more actionable and give the reader a clear idea of what they're going to get. Now let's look at one that missed the mark. Imagine seeing this headline. You won't believe what happened next. That's classic clickbait. It makes you curious, but it tells you nothing about the actual content. It's all smoke and mirrors.
Yeah. And it really breaks that trust we were talking about. If a headline feels manipulative, I instantly get suspicious of the brand.
Right. Now let's look at one that I think does a really good job. The secret to happier employees. It's not what you think.
Oh, I like that one. It definitely makes me curious, and it challenges my assumptions.
Yeah, it uses a question to engage the reader, hints at a surprising revelation, and targets a specific audience, like business leaders or HR professionals. Right. And it feels authentic and relatable, like it's offering real insight without all the hype.
Exactly. This headline shows us how to use curiosity and intrigue without resorting to those cheap tricks.
I agree. These examples are so helpful. I feel like I can spot a good headline now.
Right.
But how can I use this for my own content?
Well, one thing you can try is to write 3 different headlines for the same piece of content.
Oh, like a headline brainstorm.
Yeah, exactly. Try different approaches. A question, a list, a strong statement, an emotional trigger. See what feels best and what aligns with your brand.
And maybe even test them out with friends or on social media to see which one gets the most engagement.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Remember, writing effective headlines is a process. You're always experimenting and refining. It's about finding what works best for you and your audience.
So there's no magic formula.
Yeah.
But understanding these techniques gives us a really good starting point. It's amazing to see how much thought and strategy goes into something as simple as a headline.
It all comes back to the power of language. Headlines are more than just words. They're gateways to information, connections, and experiences.
So well said. To wrap up our deep dive, let's remember that understanding these techniques can help us all become better readers and better writers. We can be more discerning readers, cut through the noise, and find content that matters. And when we create content, we can use these insights to write headlines that engage, inform, and build real connections.
It's about using language thoughtfully and ethically to create a world where headlines spark curiosity, foster understanding, and inspire meaningful conversations.
Beautifully put. That's a perfect note to end on. A big thank you to our expert today for sharing their amazing insights, and to all of you for joining us on this journey of discovery.
My pleasure.
Remember, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the things that fascinate you. Until next time, stay curious.